let me take you back to 2015. I'd recently raised a couple of £100,000 for our budding young startup. We'd recently finished painting our non-serviced offices, and we coined the space Nano Towers, as it sat on the top floor of a Flatiron-style building. The pointed bow of the office, making it an unappealing space to most businesses. But for us, looking out over the streets of Bristol, it represented the fact that we were finally captains of our own ship. We had to clean the toilets ourselves, the wonky floorboards would creak under the wobbly desks, and every morning we would walk into the office covered in sweat because there was never a working lift. But it was ours, our lease at least, a product of the work we'd done to establish ourselves over the past year. We were in that hazy glow of early funding and feeling very grown up because we had our own office. And the tech team had one request. Can we have Slack? Meanwhile, thousands and thousands of miles away, in an office in San Francisco, a slightly more advanced startup team was celebrating landing yet another major investment. Hundreds of millions to help them with world domination. Now in 2025, Slack is a major startup success story that is currently estimated to be growing at least 17% year-on-year growth. And yet my Pavlovian response to anyone saying, "Shall we use Slack?" is, I hate Slack. Now my investigation suggests that this is unfair, but I'm not the only one. Tell me in the comments below if you are a Slack lover or a Slack hater. Is it Marmite? And if you've never heard of Slack before, let me know that too. If you haven't, then you're in for a treat. Get ready to jump on a decade-old trend. In this video, I will tell you why I have such a terrible response to the mere mention of the word Slack, what we can learn from Slack's startup journey, and how we can better use it as a tool in organizations to ensure that it works well for everyone. So let's start with the Slack pitch, or at least how I imagine it may have been in 2012. You know, when you're working on a project, maybe you want some help solving a problem, a link to an article that was mentioned, or maybe you just need to let them know that there is cake in the kitchen. Maybe you can open your emails, drop them a note, and they get hightailed by all those other emails in your inbox sent there to distract you. You could text someone, but then that opens the doors to your personal channels. And no one wants a note from their partner popping up when they're in the middle of walking their colleague through a website refresh. Perhaps you are even still based in an office right now. Don't just want to yell across a room full of people who are focused on their work. How do you even yell a link to somebody else anyway? www. All of these solutions are terrible, and don't even get me started on Google Message or the clunkiness of Teams. Definitely during the 2010s, if not still now. Businesses are leaving millions of dollars on the table because their teams are not communicating well. Enter Slack, your team's software platform that focuses on transforming the whole workplace by making it simpler, more pleasant, and productive through its collaborative messaging platform. And if you're worried about the word Slack, meaning that your team is slacking off, that's not what it stands for. It stands for searchable log of all communications and knowledge. The proprietary messaging technology that underpins Slack was initially developed for a multiplayer game, but now it allows for near instant delivery for all those small interactions, which will help a team connect and thrive. And it's not just direct messages. You can set up channels so that you can have conversations about certain subjects with certain team members. The Beachhead market is small but fast scaling teams, but with both free and enterprise solutions, it is suitable for everyone from solopreneurs who are doing collaborations all the way to corporate entities. The founding team has extensive startup experience, and the whole team has worked together several times. Founder Stuart Butterfield, alongside the rest of the founding team, is well known in Silicon Valley for developing and exiting Flickr through an acquisition to Yahoo in 2005 for $25 to $30 million. The team is rounded out by Eric Costello, credited as being the playful heart and soul of the business, as well as customer lead, Cal Henderson and Sergei Moratov, with their complementary technical capabilities. The mission is to make work life more pleasant, more simple, and more productive. Keep watching to find out whether I think it achieved that mission. So let's dive into Slack's origin story. Chapter 1, the pivot. What's that you say? How can you pivot at the start? Well, as I've already established, the team had already worked together on several projects. And their story begins many, many years before my team gathered around in that creaky office. Although I'm sure they had some similarities back in those early days. They founded a business called TinySpec. And the whole founding team seemed to mostly be interested in building something that is novel and impactful. Eric Costello once said, Butterfield isn't driven by being successful for its own sake, or just making lots of money. Instead, he enjoyed the craft and pleasure of applying his skills to build interesting, useful things. A lesson many founders could learn from today. So the first point I want to make here is that Stuart Butterfield and the rest of the founding team were not first-time founders. And it wasn't the first time they'd all worked together. As with so many successful startup stories, there is the whole Flickr prequel to the Slack story. Now just a quick aside on Flickr, you may remember this from that one friend who was really into photography in the noughties. And they would upload their semi-professional photos to Flickr and then send you the link on Facebook. They couldn't just put them on Instagram because it didn't exist. So after the Flickr acquisition, the team got back together again, and this is when they formed TinySpec. And their real focus was on building a game. They wanted to create a game called Glitch. Now, funnily enough, Flickr had also started as a game, which then pivoted into something else. And the team worked and worked on building Glitch, but ultimately they couldn't make it work. It's interesting when you read about it because they say they ended up a bit stuck in the middle. They did manage to raise quite a lot of money for it and they put a lot of work into it. They also had a passionate user base, but it wasn't growing quite quickly enough and they weren't quite getting to where they were getting the return on investment that they needed quickly enough. So they were a bit in a grey area. Do we keep pushing forward or do we not? Do we close this down? And I think they could tell that it was becoming sort of stickier and stickier to grow this. So in the end, they shut down Glitch. And really, this is the story as old as time. For those of you who don't know the journey of my startup, whilst we didn't shut it down, we did do an acquisition, there was a lot of this going on at the time. It actually just takes so much longer than you expect it to. At the time when they shut down Glitch, they released a statement saying, unfortunately, Glitch has not attracted an audience large enough to sustain itself, and based on a long period of experimentation and our best estimates, it seems unlikely that it ever would. And given the prevailing technological trends, the movement towards mobile, and especially the continued decline of the Flash platform on which Glitch was built, side note, this was a big conversation for us in the early 2010s. It was unlikely to do so before its time was up. Glitch was very ambitious and pushed the limits of what could be done in a browser-based game. And then those limits pushed back. But what it did effectively was allow players to talk to one another within the game. And that core technology was ultimately what was then used to start Slack. But in my opinion, the real magic that skyrocketed this business was the founding team. Recently on a podcast, Cal said, so the process of deciding, we realized that when we shut the game down, we wanted to keep working together. The founders, whatever we did next, we'd want to keep working together. So you had this passionate set of complementary skilled people who really liked building things that could be useful to other people. Now, I want to take you back to my story now, which was my development team that wanted Slack. They could see the issues with email. They could see that they needed something to do these quick communications as a development team. And I think that this is also one of the real reasons that Slack was successful. I think it was built by people who were genuinely interested in building things and collaborating together to create something. and it was essentially for developers by developers. Slack was, and even now if you go onto the Slack blog, they're still creating content that's about like, how do you build businesses? What have you learnt along the way? And something that gives away that this is what was going on for Slack when they were building is Stuart Butterfield says that what he does when he's trying to create ideas is he actually logs his frustrations around everyday tasks. So because this team had been a tech team, they tried building a game, didn't quite work. They built Flickr. That was a success to some extent. They tried building another game. That didn't quite work. They then are working together as a team. They're building all these frustrations as working together as a team. And as it turns out, those were the same frustrations that my tech team were having. They wanted Slack so that they could solve those problems. The Slack founding team understood that market because they'd been through it themselves. Now, of course, we know that in good business, we also test that other people are having those challenges, and I'm sure Slack did that too. They were, of course, embedded into the Silicon Valley ecosystem by this point. So they took that same core technology, they found a different application that was based on frustrations that they knew people were having, and they also had what we call the Beachhead market, which was other people who essentially resembled them and what they were doing. And in my experience, this is how Slack took off. It was all the developers, all the gamers, they knew about Slack sooner than anybody else because they were tapped into that environment. And they were the ones that pushed the usage. So the next part of Slack's origin story was, of course, you don't just need a useful thing, you don't just need a great team. You need the fuel to actually grow that team. And whilst some businesses are able to grow organically and just through income through customers, that wasn't really the era we were in 2015. And in fact, even when Slack got to IPO and went public, they still weren't profitable. So investment was absolutely necessary. And Slack really caught the Silicon Valley cloud-based SaaS wave. They were in the right place at the right time. And you know what? Compared to now, if you were in the right place at the right time, doing this kind of product, it was easier to get funding. I have many companies come to me now and they're like, what about all of these companies that get money before they've even got customers and they haven't got revenue yet, or they haven't got a certain amount of traction? I'm like, yeah, it might have worked that way for Slack. Doesn't mean it's going to work that way for you now, unfortunately. Although if you tick some of the boxes that Slack ticked, then perhaps you might find it slightly easier. And those boxes that they ticked within the startup playbook were, they were second-time founders, they were a team that had worked together before and did a successful exit. Of course, the thing that often isn't said is that also means that they've got a bit more fuel to play with just personally. They would have made money from that original acquisition. Already had investor networks. Reid Hoffman and Esther Dyson had actually invested in Flickr way back, and they made significant money in a short time period for that Flickr investment, which of course then means that they're going to trust this team when they come around with their new idea. The idea of creating something for an industry that they really deeply understood also means that they were able to get traction and they really understood the needs of that market. They also caught the wave at the right time. But I think the other thing to say is their pivots also show that they do understand both the technical and the commercial side of business. And so all of that's going to go down really well with investors, especially if you've already got those investor networks to introduce yourself to. So it was no surprise that TinySpec was able to attract investment. Even in the glitch era, they raised approximately 27 million. And that, of course, had enabled some of that core technology development. So I did manage to get my hands on Slack's pitch book details. For those of you who don't know, pitch book has like basically every single detail that's not behind closed doors, not under lock and key about every company. The interesting things I found here was the number of patents that Slack has. 142 patents with 7 pending. And for a software company, that sounds like a lot. Oddly, one of them was in the musical instrument category. Anyway, I digress. Some of the patents include a system and method for instant messaging using an email protocol, for example. Okay, I've got to where I wanted to. This is the investment information. They did a seed round for 1 million in January 2009. I know any of those businesses that I know out there, and you're like, what do you mean they did a seed round of 1 million? And I think it was probably kind of pre-seed because this is right when the business was starting up. But then they did subsequent rounds, 25 million in 2014, 74 million in 2014. These are in pounds because this is a British pitch book. They did a later stage, so 2015, they did both a 4.39 million in March. So they needed 5 million in March, but in April of 2015, they then brought in 107 million in investment. This kept going. They had rounds of 140 million, 190 million, 330 million pounds. And all the way up to the IPO, in total, they did 887 million in investment. Very interestingly, the IPO took place in 2019. And at this point, they were valued at 2.43 billion. They were then acquired by Salesforce in 2021. Their valuation was 19.56 billion. They were not profitable when they were valued at 2.43 billion in 2019. Why that increase in valuation between 2019 and 2021? Well, of course, the pandemic happened. So internal comms definitely became more attractive over that period of time. Having a look at them here. So in 2020, the income was 493 million. In 2021, the end of their fiscal year, their revenue was 701 million. But throughout that whole time, they were still making a loss. So that growth was not because suddenly they were profitable, but their revenue had shot up over the period of time from when COVID came in. Their fiscal year is end of January. So actually we hadn't had lockdowns or anything at that point. They were generating nearly 500,000, and then by a year later, so that was that like heavy lockdowns over 2020 and the beginning of 2021, that's when they generated 200 million more. Wild numbers. So clearly Slack was this massively exciting proposition for many, many investors. Not profitable, but decent user numbers, which I will find for you and put on the screen. But back in those days, not everyone understood why we were just adding another messaging channel.
I had a chance to buy 20% of Slack for nothing, and I passed. I didn't get it. I still don't. I mean, what is it? Is it email? Is it a chat room?
And guess what? She's not the only one. I also did not understand why we would need Slack. Why I hate Slack. First of all, it's just another messaging channel. I currently have approximately 7 email addresses, as well as Teams accounts for 2 different places, 1 Slack account at the moment, and of course I also have WhatsApp groups, I have messages. It's just another thing to check, just another thing to have a whole bunch of notifications building up from. So this is my first reason why I find it difficult and why I have found it difficult in the past. Now, I don't know if that's is there something to do with my autism and I struggle because it's just more mess, right? It's just more busyness, more mess. Everything feels more and more disordered the more places you have to check in order to get your messages. The counter of that is it can actually be quite useful to have very specific places for specific things to go to. And I understand that I have a portfolio career, so I do have, not everyone has this many email accounts. But certainly when I brought this into my team initially, I was like, I've just got another thing that I'm going to be behind on. And honestly, when I was leading the business, because Slack was our internal tool, it was way more important for me, or certainly I felt at the time, to be on my emails, because that was where we were communicating with external people, with investors, with customers. And so I mean, obviously the team is important too, but because I was really the only outward person at that time, I was like, oh no, now I've got to check Slack. I've missed something on Slack. Oh. And it has been shown to impact sleep and overwhelm for people in the workplace, just for the same reasons that all of these different messaging channels have. Many people fault Slack's user interface and channel structure, and it's definitely something I also find quite difficult. Several channels that you don't really know how you're meant to interact with them, when they got set up, who set them up, what were they set up for. I know that this is all to do with kind of bad usage perhaps, but we will come on to that later. And so there is a significant learning curve, and I just didn't feel like I had the time to invest in going through this learning journey with yet another platform. And interestingly, even though the name of Slack comes from it being searchable, and the idea is that it's meant to be a really, really easy place to find the information that you've shared with your team, I actually find it really quite difficult to find information. And then the final reason I really hated Slack, keep watching to the end of the video to find out if this hatred is as strong now as it used to be. I think I really struggled because in many places there's been very unclear usage rules. So in that first business, I was the CEO, I could have set up these usage rules. I didn't feel like I had the time or the bandwidth. It was just another thing to do. I really struggled because you'd be getting all of this stuff coming through on Slack, and I didn't know if, for example, I gave a thumbs up on something, do people then think, oh, as a CEO, like I'm giving some kind of instruction for people to do that or something else? So I definitely struggled with being like, hang on a second, you've got all this stuff, I'm getting bombarded with a load of new information, but I don't really know how you want to use this right now, and I don't really know what you're reading from how I'm using this right now, and I don't have time to come along and set up a whole bunch of usage rules for this new platform. Another thing I've found that is totally ridiculous, and if you're a founder and you do this, then it's wild. I have had people come to me and when they're on other teams and like they've got in trouble because they haven't replied to Slack messages within 15 minutes. Now, if that's what you've established with your team and there's very specific reasons for doing that, great, fine, whatever. But if your team is a team that has to run workshops, if they have to do meetings, they have to take a lunch break, like, are they going to immediately be able to get back to you within 15 minutes to every single Slack message that you send? No. And so I think this idea that it's basically like a phone call and you're going to be there to respond immediately is kind of a crazy idea. Why don't we? Mind blown. But how about we use phone calls if it's something that's really, really urgent and we need to level it up. And I think this is the crux of the point why I find it difficult with Slack, because sometimes the notification that pops up is somebody sending a silly GIF about something to make the team laugh. And guess what? When you're a CEO, that can be a bit frustrating sometimes, even though I understand that there is value in the team cohesion part of some of that. But at the same time, if somebody's expecting a very, very quick response from Slack, it's also this thing that like is urgent, emergency, whatever. So it's very, very difficult because there's this like very different levels of urgency that are built into this platform. So I think all of these things for me just made it something that was just very overwhelming, something that I hadn't introduced into the team. So I struggled because I hadn't spent the time really researching how this works, how do we use this best, what are our rules of engagement, and so that overwhelming nature of it is something that I have now carried through in many, many different scenarios. And I've never, till this point, really jumped on board the Slack train. So those were my reasons for hating Slack. But why do other people in the world hate Slack? What controversies have there been? Most recently, the controversies have been around AI and data. There was a clause that somebody dug out in the AI training policy that said, to develop AI/ML models, our systems analyze customer data, e.g. messages, content, and files submitted to Slack, as well as other information, including usage information, as defined in our privacy policy and in your customer agreement. This was actually an old policy. It was a mistake that it was in there, or maybe somebody had dug it out from the past. And the reality was customer data was not getting used to train large language models. This was once Salesforce owned Slack, so a Salesforce spokesman said, Slack has industry standard platform level machine learning models to make the product experience better for customers, like channel and emoji recommendations and search results. These models do not access original message content in DMs, private channels, or public channels to make these suggestions. We do not build or train these models in such a way that they can learn, memorize, or be able to reproduce customer data. We do not develop LLMs or other generative models using customer data. Slack uses generative AI in its Slack AI product offering, leveraging third-party LLMs. No customer data is used to train third-party LLMs. Slack AI uses off-the-shelf LLMs where the models don't retain customer data. Additionally, because Slack AI hosts these models on its own AWS infrastructure, customer data never leaves Slack's trust boundary, and the providers of the LLM never have any access to the customer data. So we're very clear, LLMs do not have access to any Slack customer data, just in case you didn't get that from those other messages. There's something else that people have not liked about Slack is also that it doesn't offer end-to-end encryption, which is something you'll see WhatsApp telling you all the time, that it offers end-to-end encryption, especially because remember that time when everyone thought WhatsApp was reading all their stuff, and we don't really trust Facebook anyway, but that's a whole other video, Meta, and everyone moved to Signal. So as soon as everyone saw, oh, Slack doesn't offer end-to-end encryption on its messages, then people didn't like that either, because it means messages could get intercepted by hackers. Slack does have options to mitigate that risk, including bring your own key functionality, which gives enterprises enhanced control over their data encryption. What's interesting there is that's something that is very much for those enterprise customers. So you can see Slack has moved on from those days when it was for those little founding teams in their creaky offices. Hi, Editing Becky here. One thing that I need to add is that one of the biggest issues with Slack, just like with so many software tools, and especially those with AI integrated and chatbots, is the environmental impact, which of course is going up and up and up. I think we're going to move to a future where we start to see more and more of the data on how much environmental impact each Slack message sends or each kind of AI request sends. You'll remember this was a thing previously with regard to emails, and I think it really needs to come back because this is where the biggest issues are now. I also wanted to mention that for many people, there's a real addictive quality to any kind of messaging service. So emails, social media messages, and of course, Slack. So the notifications kind of doing this dopamine hit. This is not something I experience at all. Like, I get no joy whatsoever from, well, I don't have any notifications on anyway, but I really don't feel that dopamine hit. I just feel drained when I see messages and when I feel like I've missed messages in all sorts of different places. But I know for some people that also can add to some of the issues with this platform and other platforms because they're not switching off and they're continuing to use these things, say, well into the evening, and then not sleeping properly, not switching off or winding down at all. So I've talked about the founding team already, and I tried to look for kind of controversies around the founding team, and I really cannot find anything. So of course there might be little bits and pieces here and there, but the fact that this team worked together on multiple startups in a row also shows that like they've got to be pretty decent people, because it's hard to work with co-founders. So overall, I'd say that kind of there are actually very few controversies, and there's a lot of kind of mitigations and responses if there is any kind of controversy. Now, as I've already mentioned, Slack was acquired in 2021 by Salesforce, and whilst today I'm not going to go into a deep dive around Salesforce, again, as corporates go, Salesforce actually has a pretty good recommendation. The other thing to say about Slack is its Glassdoor rating is 4 out of 5, so that's pretty good as well. And 70% of people say that they would recommend working at Slack to a friend. That's based on over 1,000 reviews. It has gone down slightly since they were acquired. And I guess that's to be expected. Cultures do shift and change. So if I was looking for a decent billionaire, then I might put Stuart Butterfield on that list. So actually, as a business, Slack's a pretty good business. If we're going to support a messaging service, then I think it probably ranks quite highly, especially alongside the other companies that are providing this kind of thing. So I had a bunch of issues with it, but could we make that better? What would I do if I was using Slack now? And the truth is, a bad workman always blames their tools. I've already admitted that back in those days, I did not look at how this works. I didn't learn Slack before I started using it. I didn't set clear objectives about what we were using it for, what the different channels were for, and I didn't really work with the team to train them how to implement this properly in the business either. So that's what I would do now if I was going to introduce it and use it well. I would be clear about the objectives, both internally but also externally. I have friends who've always used Slack very effectively, both internally and externally. I would give good training, and that would include training myself on the updated functionality. There are so many integrations now, there is AI. How can we best use this to make our lives easier, to automate things, and to get that productive, enjoyable communication across teams? And on the data side, I'd also make sure that I gave really good training to my employees on best practices around safeguarding confidential information, which of course we have to do with anything, especially with all the AI tools out there right now. I would also put in place robust access controls, which again is going to come in line with what are the original objectives, who needs to know what, which channels are for whom, etc., etc. And we would be very clear about the usage rules. Slack actually has a little section on every single channel about what is this channel used for, but many people don't use that section. That is a helpful section. Make sure you fill that out if you're using Slack, because there's nothing that frustrates me more, and I have this right now, where there is an automated channel and you've got all this information coming through and you keep getting notifications from it. Of course I snooze them, but I don't know what I'm meant to be doing with this information. And I've just realized, as it turns out, that some of that information is coming from information I'm putting into a different system within our organization. But nobody told me that that was then going to be shared across like every other person in this organization. That type of usage is what we can put right by being clear about what these channels are used for and just being very transparent across the team where their information is flowing. So what's next for Slack? They're currently focused on combining two things, AI and integrations. They have something called Agent Force, which sounds like something from the Avengers. Agent Force, unite! That's all about custom AI agents. And they've got lots of different things in play that are going to keep them up to speed with other communications platforms. They're working on even deeper integration with Salesforce, which further indicates their focus on combining forces with the parent company and really wanting to be a dominant force across the enterprise landscape, if they're not already. These stats will tell you where they are right now. They currently have 79 million monthly active users, with projections ranging up to 4.2 billion for their revenue in 2025. They have people using this in 150 different countries. 215,000 organizations now use Slack. Some of the early investors in Slack made an insane amount of money, really big returns. And most of them exited around about the time that Slack went public in 2019. Some estimations put the return on investment at about 500x for some of those early investors. And I've actually read even more than that, about 1,000x elsewhere. So if you'd have put $1,000 into Slack in 2009, then you would have come away with $500,000 in 2019. In hindsight, it was not one to turn down.
I passed on Slack.
And the lesson on that? Sometimes going with the herd is the right thing to do. As for the founding team, they're all angel investors and just really living their life right now. Stuart exited Salesforce in 2022 and now invests in other startups that matter to him. including Tandem, which is a virtual office platform for remote teams. Eric actually retired a bit sooner. He actually had a fire in his house, which thankfully everyone was okay in the end, but I think it was something that shook him up quite a lot. He did return to work, but it really shifted his priorities, so ultimately he left. I can't really find anything about where Sergey is now. And I think of all of them, Sergey definitely stays more under the radar. And Cal left Slack just 18 months ago, but he did recently return to do a podcast on the Building Slack website. It sounds like in the last 18 months he spent most of his time building a Lego model of Notre Dame Cathedral and listening to 150 audiobooks, which honestly, like, that is some habit stacking I can get behind. And when asked why the team stayed together so long, he said, "I think we like each other, which is helpful. We have a complementary set of skills. The joy and the motivation was in creating stuff and seeing people use it." It's really so simple. They were so successful because of the intrinsic motivations. They were genuinely driven by wanting to create things. If they weren't, then they could have just walked away after the Flickr acquisition and probably lived perfectly fine lives. The fact that they were able to stick together also lends credibility to that statement that they genuinely liked each other and liked working together. And even when they came back, they built Slack, they still stuck together for another decade as they built this company. So in summary, the hat I wear now is no longer that of the disheveled founder. My business did not make anyone 1000x, unfortunately, not my first business anyway, but hey, we're still in the game. And we certainly paid a few people's mortgages for several years, so I feel pretty good about that. I now work with other leaders and other entrepreneurs, and when we talk about communications platforms, we will look at what is the most fit for purpose for that team. Now I've done this deep dive, am I still gonna say that I hate Slack? I don't think so. But I do think that the most important quality that made this business a success is actually no longer in the company. And that's the founding team and their desire to create something that was useful. As a final thought, don't be afraid to think big and think deeply. Stuart Butterfield once told Forbes, "Studying philosophy taught me two things: to write really clearly. I learned how to follow an argument all the way down," which is really invaluable in running meetings. That's a pretty grounded and humble quote. It's not necessarily a sticker you would put on the back of a bumper truck, but it does encourage us to keep on following those arguments all the way down. Look for the nuance and don't be afraid to carve your own thoughts and opinions. Just do it based on real information. That's what true leaders do. Let me know in the comments if you like this deep dive and if you would like me to do it for other businesses or other products. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.